This list is about the most serious red flags in men. Not only is this list useful for girls to see how a guy measures up for a new relationship, but it's also a list of traits a man should look out for in selecting a good male friend or evaluating his male family members. These red flags are not created equal, but they're all bad things. Some of these are absolute deal breakers for any relationship, whether it's platonic, romantic, business, or otherwise. The one thing they all have in common is a lack of accountability, responsibility, and discipline. If a man doesn't have those things down, he can't have a healthy relationship. This list isn't exhaustive. There are other warning signs, but these are the 9 major red flags in men. Number 1, no job, can't hold a job, or no legal source of income. The obvious exceptions are students, assuming he isn't majoring in nonsense. This also doesn't include guys who have recently been laid off but are looking for work. Lastly, this doesn't include your guys who do cyclical work like your landscapers, assuming that their bills are covered in the interim. This is about a guy who is in a constant state of unemployment. This is the guy who gets hired and fired at some place new every 4 to 5 months. I'm not saying that he needs to be rich. I'm not even saying that he needs to be middle class. But he needs to have the maturity to realize that he needs to work and not survive off of other people's labor. This type of parasitic survival could involve a guy living with his parents, collecting government assistance, or breaking the law to survive. The issue with breaking the law to make money isn't just ethical. For example, it doesn't matter if you sell drugs or use them. All the more power to you if you want to embrace the crackhead hustle lifestyle. The issue is the type of people and the dangers they bring if they get paid this way. Drug dealers tend to bring around drug addicts, and nothing good happens when crackheads start to occupy your life, whether incidentally or intentionally. Just ask anyone who's ever had to deal with a crackhead outside the gas station offering to protect their car for $1 and a bag of chips. And if you want to learn more about crackheads, check out this video here where I discuss the 9 things I learned living next to crackheads and crack dealers. But I digress. I once had to stop hanging out with a childhood friend after he brought his gun to an innocent house party. These are white kids in the suburbs, man. Nobody was busting caps, but he's from the hood. I had also driven with him in my car while he had the gun and a copious amount of marijuana. If we got pulled over or hurt someone, my life would have gotten much harder. Number 2, he has no plans or goals he's taking action towards. Goals and plans are powerful because they keep a guy from behaving recklessly. At the very least, they force him to act in a way that gets him closer to his goals rather than further away from them. That's one of my secrets to success. When I got sober, it kept me out of bars and places where bad things happen after dark. Now, the goal he's chasing doesn't have to be major world type goals. They don't even need to be altruistic, ambitious, or selfish. The goals only need to satisfy 5 criteria. They don't take advantage of or hurt innocent people. You can't hurt, steal, or take advantage of people not in the game. They don't generate a net negative in the world. You don't have to make the world a better place, but you shouldn't make it a worse one either. Those goals force you to develop skills and abilities beyond your current level. This means you're doing something rather than nothing. They're objectively measurable. Inner peace and self-confidence are nice, but much of that comes from being competent enough at something to where people can tell you that you're good at it. And the last one, they force interaction in the physical world. Even if you make money from them, for example, video games do not count, largely because the cost of getting talented enough to make money from them far exceeds the value gained during the journey. If a man has no goals or plans that fit these 5 criteria, he will be an active liability or a passive drag. He won't bring you down because he has nothing to bring himself up with. In other words, you don't want to be around a guy who just goes to work, comes home, and plays video games. This doesn't mean a guy can't have hobbies and ways to blow off steam, only that his goals need to extend beyond getting a new high score, binging on a new Netflix series, and getting blackout drunk on the weekend. Not to mention, getting blackout drunk might be one of the signs they have a drinking problem. This leads nicely into number 3, substance or alcohol abuse. I don't need to be a relationship expert to tell you that hard drug use is an immediate disqualifier. And for the record, hard drugs are anything you have to cook, cut, stretch, or compress. Within the cooking and cutting categories, I include abuse of any prescription drugs and pill popping, basically anything other than weed. I'm also willing to consider slight psychedelic use for constructive purposes. If you see a man use hard drugs, you should limit your time around that man as much as possible. Nothing good will come of this relationship, even if they claim only to be casual users, because you don't remain a casual user of hard drugs for very long. As for marijuana, my advice is to proceed with caution. It's one thing if a person occasionally enjoys a smoke. It's a different story entirely if they have to use it every day. Not only is that an addiction, by definition, but it's also likely a way to cope with other issues. The same is true for alcohol. I happen to be sober. My life was nothing worthwhile when I was abusing alcohol. In fact, I exhibited many of the red flags listed here. Having a few drinks occasionally is not a problem. However, getting blackout drunk constantly around people is a big deal, and you need to limit your time around or outright get rid of this person. And yes, it is possible to have fun and socialize sober. Number 4, no savings and or excessive non-education debt. Now, this really isn't a big deal for your male friends. In fact, as long as they can pay their bills, keep a roof over their head, and feed themselves without asking for help, then most guys don't really care. If they don't make enough to do the things you like to do, you'll figure it out somehow and have fun other ways. Xbox is cheap. But as for relationship red flags go, this is a big deal. A guy with no money saved and a lot of student loan debt is signaling to the world that he does not think about the future. This becomes an even bigger deal the older you get. A guy at 25 with no savings and a lot of consumer debt has many legitimate reasons to be in that position. For example, he could have just gotten a new car, apartment, and furniture to go in it. But a guy who is 35, still living beyond his means and saving nothing, is signaling that he will not be reliable in a romantic relationship and he's bad with money. Ultimately, debt signals that you can't support yourself. No matter why you have it, it signals that you need help to accomplish something that you cannot accomplish alone. The debt you owe on a degree, depending on the degree, is one thing, but excessive consumer or legal debt is a huge red flag. The idea with education debt is that it is an investment into your future. The same goes for the debt you take on to start a business. The debt is a bet on yourself that eventually you'll be able to pay it back. But taking on debt to buy toys and or fund a basic lifestyle is at best irresponsible and at worst parasitic. Number 5, all of his exes happen to be narcissistic, have bipolar disorder, or some other mental issue. In general, I think it's a bad idea to discuss old relationships with new partners. Talking about exes all the time could be another red flag, but I feel like that's obvious enough to not warrant its own section. However, it's not unusual for the conversation to naturally drift that way, especially at the beginning of a new relationship. It's not uncommon to bring up issues related to the last breakup, why things ended, and what your last relationship was like. If the conversation gets on this topic, then pay attention to how a man describes his exes. There's nothing wrong with him listing her bad behavior that contributed to the decline of the relationship, but it's a huge red flag if he starts using buzzwords for mental health issues to describe her. It's a deal breaker because it's a cowardly way to avoid taking responsibility for his bad decisions. It's much easier to say something was wrong with her than to figure out how his actions contributed to things. And yes, this explanation is often used in place of taking responsibility for things because it rules out the possibility that she was fine, but he had behaved in a way that made her act that way. Number 6, multiple baby mamas. If a guy gets multiple women pregnant, this means he can't exercise basic discipline. There's no reason why any child is accidentally born in the 21st century in a developed nation. It's always the case of poor/non-existent planning. One-night stands and random hookups don't have to result in anything worse than hurt feelings the next day. It also means he can't learn from his mistakes. Let's pretend that a guy did everything he could, used a condom, pulled out, and made sure she was on birth control, and he still got her accidentally pregnant. All right, I'll give him one failure. shit happens. But if this happens 2 or 3 times, it means that he's impulsive and can't turn down opportunities with what are usually low quality women. The first time can be a mistake. Everything after that is just foolish. It means he's bad at relationships. Let's say the guy was married and he has a kid from a prior marriage. This makes sense and is unfortunately more common than it should be. It's not a red flag by itself. But if he's single and has a kid from each past relationship, that means he thought it was a good idea to have children in a relationship that wasn't going to work out multiple times. This is just not good at having good relationships. This guy is almost certainly going to have extremely messy finances. Child support will eat up most of his income, making it impossible for him to save for the future or even have a comfortable existence. Number 7, he has no friends. This doesn't just mean that he's met recently, although that's important too. You don't want to be with a socially awkward, reclusive guy who has no idea how to behave like a generally likable human being. This also goes for his past friends as well. If a guy doesn't have any friends that he's known before the age of 18, this isn't necessarily a red flag, but it should make you start looking at things a bit more in depth. If a guy doesn't have any friends from before 22, that's a red flag. But it's a red flag you need to ask questions about. This is the type of thing that might not even make itself known because you met in a city he relocated to. However, after dating him for a little while, you need to see that he's had friends for a while. This is important because, generally speaking, a guy doesn't have friends because he's either a social recluse or he's screwed over a bunch of people. And even the socially awkward guys tend to group up and be friends with one another. So you're usually looking at a dude with serious personal issues, and his family doesn't count. He must have people who have chosen to be around him, preferably for an extended time period, of their own free will, not familial obligation. Number 8, they're always late. Yes, things happen. With that said, we live in the 21st century with cellular devices. Not only can you call if something comes up, but you can also text. You can even send a message through various social media and dating apps. Showing up late, even once without calling or texting, should be grounds for dismissal from your life. This is a big deal if a guy is always late, even if he calls and texts. This means he's terrible at managing his time or honoring his plans isn't important to him. Either way, this is not a good sign for the future. And remember, I'm not talking about 5 to 10 minutes late because he needed to find a parking spot. That's acceptable. But if someone is more than 15 minutes late and that lateness fits the above description, then it's likely a big flag. And number 9, in my opinion, the biggest one that goes overlooked, male feminists. Generally speaking, avoid men who use any words ending in ist or ism to define themselves. Specifically, male feminists are problematic because they already hate what makes them male. This means that they will have trouble behaving like a man you want to date. I'll elaborate on this. There is nothing wrong with believing that everyone deserves the same opportunities and equal treatment under the law. That's just fair and reasonable. Anyone who says otherwise is crazy. But if you're a man who feels the need to make one of his defining traits that he's championing for women's rights, and women already have the same rights as men and by many metrics are ahead of them, then this man has an ulterior motive. Very often, these men are predators and abusers of women. Ultimately, it's just a trick to ingratiate themselves with women without doing the work of actually becoming a more attractive man. Knowing these signs will keep you from making friends with bad people who are hard to get rid of and can seriously damage your life quickly. With that said, sometimes someone slips through the cracks. Maybe they were cool for a while, but they've started behaving in a way that makes you wonder if things are about to get bad for everyone involved with them. But what are those signs? Check out this video where I outline the 4 signs that it is time to end a relationship so you know if it's time to deal with the ones who manage to slip through the cracks or maybe you're just overreacting.